I'm grateful that you had a chance to learn from Rabbi Reeves a little bit about the One America movement and some of their style, their research, and the vision that they have of how we can start to break down the barriers of toxic polarization to get back to the normal work we have to do, which is that we need to learn how to disagree without turning it into the hurtful, hateful, violent rhetoric that we've seen become much too common within American, I was going to say civil society, but American society. And in addition to Rabbi Reeves, we're also really honored to have Reverend Alvin Bibbs here with us this evening. He's from the Chicago area, has served in numerous capacities as a clergy person, and is now doing some really, really special and important work in the city of Chicago with the One America movement. I don't want to say too much. I want to let you share that story, but eager to see how the conceptual framework that One America builds lives on the ground in the work you're doing this. And we're really, I'm always grateful to have Reverend Lee Trollinger here with us. I know that Reverend Trollinger just this past Wednesday, and Margie, is she still here? Yeah, Margie was there. Thank you, Margie, for being there. At a Coalition of Hope meeting, starting to imagine how we here in White Plains, in Westchester County, can and need to work together across lines of racial, religious, and economic difference so that we can make sure that our community stays safe and that we care for one another in the way that we all ought to be cared for, treated with the love and dignity and respect that's so core to our tradition about how we behave and exist as human beings within community. So we're eager to learn from you the wisdom of your work and your experience so we can hopefully bring some of it here as well. So Reverend Bibbs, thank you.
Well, Shabbat Shalom. Well, I know that I am honored to be here this evening and so grateful to Rabbi Jason for the opportunity to share with all of you here this evening. It's very important when we come together as brothers and sisters across religious and racial and cultural lines for such a time as this. My name is Reverend Alvin C. Bibbs Sr. I am a product of Chicago, Illinois, and I will go on record and say this right off the bat, that I am known as a Jedi. Anybody know what a Jedi is? I am a Justice, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Executive Pastor. I am the true Jedi from the Windy City. I am really blessed and fortunate to have an opportunity to share with you tonight about the incredible work that we're doing through the One America movement in the Chicagoland area and also across the country. But I want to start out by sharing a little bit of my background with you as a precursor to what I'm about to share this evening, because it's very, very important. As I stated previously, I grew up in the Chicago community. And I grew up in a housing project very known across the country as the Cabrini Green Housing Complex. Probably one of the more well-known, notorious, drug-infested, gang-infested communities across the country. Daily, just going back and forth to school, I was probably dodging bullets on a regular basis. I've been shot at too many times to count. You can't tell today by looking at me. But I was beaten unconscious in my community. At one point, I had a .357 Magnum on the side of my neck. If I would have blinked or breathed the wrong way, I wouldn't be standing here today talking about toxic polarization and the beloved community. But I'm a firm believer that there is a God. There is a God. Some days when I would have to make my way to school, if the elevators broke down in our building, I would have to take the stairwell. And on at least 5 to 7 different occasions going through those stairwells, there was a deceased body in the stairwell that I would have to walk over to get to school on a particular morning. Let me fast forward for you a little bit here. 1967, the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came to Chicago as he was making his way across the country to support the issues of justice and righteousness and equality for all God's people. He came to Chicago in 67, and he decided while he was there to preach at 3 different churches in the community. One of those churches was my home church, Wayman AME Church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the oldest African-American denomination in the country. Well, my parents were a part of the leadership team there and elders of the church. So they got the inside scoop that Dr. King was going to be in the house. So the building that I lived in was directly across the street from my home church. So we got there super early. Before anybody else got there, we had great seats. 3rd row, center pew. Eventually, the church began to get jam-packed. People were on the rafters, all outdoors, trying to get inside. Why? Because Dr. Martin Luther King was going to be in the house. Well, to make a long story short, finally, as I sat there, 1967, sitting on my mom's lap, Rabbi, finally, the doors of the church opened, and here comes Dr. Martin Luther King and his entourage into our sanctuary. My little eyes were just piercing on the King. I remember that moment like it was yesterday. Now it's time for Dr. King to deliver one of his prolific messages. We've all heard him. I had a front row seat to one of those messages. In the midst of Dr. King's message, he pointed out in the congregation to this young child to come and stand next to him as an example in his sermon text. He was challenging the congregation to take responsibility of the community and the family and the next generation of leaders. And he pointed out in the congregation for this young child to come and stand next to him as an example in that sermon text. That young person did not move. That young person did not come forward. But that young person was me. Customary within our Christian African-American tradition, it's customary for the parents and others to greet the pastor at the end of the service. So I make my way with my mom and my dad and my 4 siblings, and we're approaching Dr. King. Dr. King was a short, stocky guy, but he had these huge hands. It's like he can palm 2 basketballs in one hand. 1967, he turned to my parents, and he says, "Would you mind if I say a prayer blessing over your child's life?" Of course, they agreed. They didn't ask me. Dr. King took his right hand, and he placed it down on the top of my neatly, pastor. He placed it down on top of my neatly afro. You put a lot of work into the afro. He took his right hand, placed it down on the top of my neatly afro, and said a prayer of blessing and commissioning over my life. There's not a day that goes by where I don't reflect and think about that commissioning and the stewarding of that blessing upon this soul of mine. We all know what happened the following year. Dr. King was assassinated. My community of Cabrini Green literally went up in flames because of the rioting and all of the violence that was taking place in the community. But something happened during that riot that I'll never forget. We lived on the 9th floor in our apartment complex. The mayor of our city brought in the National Guards into our community. It was just like a war zone. pulled the plug on all the power in our neighborhood. It's pitch black. All you see is spotlights shining, people screaming, shots being fired, glass being broken, the whole 9 yards. We were ordered to stay away from the windows. I remember in our apartment complex, sitting in the corner on the floor, balled up like a baby inside of his mother's womb. I thought to myself, I'm never going to make it out of here alive. My life is over. If you lived on the first, second, or third floor of our apartment complexes, the tear gas began to make its way up to the floors and creep through the crevices of the doors. There were parents and families that had infant children and their babies. They had to take their babies and place their tender, sweet little heads inside of freezers just to get fresh air. Many of those infant children lost their lives, and it was never, ever reported. So, friends, as I stand here tonight in front of each of you, I stand here tonight because I'm a keeper of the dream. I stand here tonight because I'm a living witness of the dream. God spared my life for moments like this. I never thought in my wildest imaginations that a kid from an under-resourced, private situation like Cabrini Green would ever stand in front of a group like yourselves in a synagogue when people told me that my life would never amount to anything. But one of the statements that has been shared by many of our friends that are Jewish in the Chicago community, we have a common mission, we have a common struggle, and we have a common and collective trauma as people. And so, friends, I'm honored to be here tonight to talk about the work of how we can close these divides and division of hatred and bigotry and racism and anti-Semitism, because the time is now. This is not the moment to abort the mission of the dream. Now see, amen. What I was about to say before you start clapping, now in my tradition, when I make a comment like that, this is not the moment to abort the mission. Everybody screams and say, yeah! No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. So, friends, when we think about where we are today, the One America movement is affording us a unique opportunity across the country to address the spiritual crisis of toxic polarization. Here's the reality of that, friends. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what social, economic, racial background you come from. Toxic polarization affects every human being that walks the planet Earth. You don't get a pass. There's no exceptions to the rule. Toxic polarization affects all of us on a regular basis. See if we can get this click. I might need to turn it on, right? That might help. All right. That's me right there. People call me the Reverend A Train because I keep the justice train on the track. Choo-choo. I also serve as the president and CEO of the Justice Journey Alliance Leadership Foundation of Chicago, an organization that I birthed many years ago. For 15 years, I served at Willow Creek Community Church in South Barrington, Illinois. This particular church literally launched the mega church movement across the country, spearheaded by the pastor Bill Hybels many years ago. Within that community, God called me into that space to help re-engineer how that church viewed the gospel, how that church viewed biblical justice and social justice, which many care not to talk about. While at the same time, that church went from literally 100% homogeneous, where it flipped to a multicultural congregation. I shared with Rabbi Jason, for many years I served as the chaplain to the world-famous Chicago Cubs. Don't take me off the platform now. I got the mic. And I prayed him into the playoff and passed the baton to someone else to get him to the World Series. It's interesting. Two things I never thought would happen in my life, where the Cubs would win the World Series and I would live to see it happen, and we would have an African-American president. Never thought that would happen in my lifetime. I can go home and rest now. But there's still work to do. There's still work to do. So, we all have heard, and Pastor Jason talked about this, that Rabbi Herschel and Dr. Martin Luther King had a very close relationship that was precedented, that really helped to pave the way historically between the African American and Jewish community. Years ago, when I served at Willow Creek Community Church, God gave me this vision that somehow, some way, there would be an opportunity to rekindle the flame of how and what these two leaders really modeled for us as a people. When you think about the civil rights and human rights struggle, the Jewish community was front and center in the movement. Many synagogues were bombed, lives were destroyed. But the reality is, there's always been this unique and beautiful relationship because of the struggles that our people historically has experienced throughout generation. And it continues to this present day. But there's good news, my friends. Because as I stated earlier, this is not the time to abort the mission. This is the time to strengthen the mission. This is the time to organize. This is the time to enlarge our tent. This is the time to unite so that we as a people can get to the promised land. Dr. King said, I may not get there with you, but my eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Friends, we have work to do because of what these two models for us. There is a sense of accountability that each of us share. In 2023, a small group of African Americans and Jewish faith leaders came together under the banner of the One America movement and the American Jewish Committee to embrace this vision that God had placed on my heart to rekindle this flame between our communities. As you see here on the screen, this is where we met in downtown Chicago. It's where we met to begin to dream together about this movement. You can't see it on the screen, but let me just read it for you. It says, the Jewish community was historically very involved in the civil rights movement. Many synagogues were bombed during the fight and struggle for equal rights. The One America movement and the American Jewish Committee are partnering to rekindle that uniting flame by working together across faith to bridge the divides that currently exist within our society. The dream lives. The vision is ignited. The people are coming together. So at this listening session, we asked ourselves some key questions to help launch this vision around the Justice and Freedom Fellowship, which is operationalizing right now today. The first question we asked, what are some points of connection? What are some ways that we can connect together across our cultures, across our race? What does it look like to be a good partner and an ally? You have to ask these strategic questions along the way. From your perspective, let's discuss together barriers and roadblocks historically and the current day. What are some of those issues that can hinder us? What does working together as African Americans and Jewish Americans today really mean? What does that mean? What does that look like? Then we go on and say, what should it look like when we bring our communities together? What should it look like? How can we create opportunities to bring more members of our community together? And of course, anytime you launch a vision of this magnitude, there's always the key question: what is the end goal? See, within One America, we're trying to tackle three major giants in the area of race, politics, and religion. You want to divide a group of people? You introduce those three giants, and everybody's going to go scattering. But we're trying to meet this head on because there is a spiritual crisis. It is spiritual. See, I'm a firm believer, friends, that when we talk about racism, racism is an economic issue. Racism is an economic issue. If we get on the economic side of the divide, we will close the gaps and eliminate racism. Because it's about power, it's about control, it's about the haves and the have-nots. We can close that gap if we get on the solution side of the economics. So after we came together in this listening session to begin to think about what this Justice and Freedom Fellowship can look like, we said, all right, it's time for us to break bread together. One of our wonderful leaders, her name is Dale, in the bottom picture there, she said, look, let's open up my home. And we had a feast, friends. I'm going to tell you right now, before this particular gathering at Dale's home, I have to be honest, umbrella of grace, I was totally in the dark about whitefish. I'm a billboard now for whitefish. I'm like the biggest whitefish fan on the planet. I was looking for some tonight, and I didn't see it. If I missed it, I'm sorry, let me know. But I was looking for the whitefish, Rabbi. I wanted that whitefish bad. I was like, yeah, I know we're going to get some whitefish tonight. But again, we had fellowship, breaking bread together, getting to know one another on an intimate basis. See, if you're going to launch something and build something, you have to do what? Get to know one another. Share your stories. Share your struggles. Share your pain. Share your hopes and your dreams along the way. Then we moved into this historical reflection phase. Now we have a small group of leaders, a leadership team that's coming together, and we begin to ask ourselves some key questions. Beautiful leadership team, isn't it? We said in the 40s, the 50s, and 60s, we had good momentum between the African American and Jewish American communities. Then the 70s arrived. Something happened that stifled momentum. What was that from your perspective? So we went into the laboratory begin to ask ourselves key questions. What happened when the 70s arrived? And one of the key areas that was pointed out was that after Dr. King was assassinated, that prophetic voice, that connection, that respected leader with integrity, credibility, all of those things was gone. And therefore, the relationship between our two communities began to take a hit. Because there was a lack of mutual edifying leadership at the forefront in making it happen. We went further and said, what can we learn from our predecessors that can help us rekindle that flame today? So friends, you have to fully immerse yourself in history. You have to fully immerse yourself in the story. And ask yourself this question, what can we learn from our predecessors? The lessons learned. The key insights. When you think of the civil rights movement, Dr. King and others, they would stay in the war room for hours and wouldn't come out of that space in Atlanta, Georgia, and other places until the vision was crystal clear in terms of what the end goal was about and what was going to be laid on the line to make it happen. That meant human sacrificing. Everyone knew when you came out the war room, you were laying your life on the line. And there was no guarantee for return. And many rabbis and Jewish leaders were in that space, sacrificing their lives for the struggle of civil and human rights. We went on to say, within this leadership team, how can we leverage a success, a win from the past, and use it to catalyze our future? What can we learn from the past to catalyze our energy? I love our leaders from the American Jewish Committee, the regional director, Sarah, and associate regional director, Barbara. These leaders are committed to fulfilling the dream. To fulfilling the dream. And they're leveraging resources in their teams to make that happen. Now we move into, we've broken bread together. Now all of this, friends, you see, it takes time. You cannot marinate this type of work. You can't microwave this. You got to slow cook it. You got to put it in the slow cooker. When it comes out of that slow cooker, it's tender, it's right, it's moist, and what? It's good. It's good. You got to slow cook it. So that's what we've been doing. Taking our time to make sure that we learn and build a relationship together. So now we say, look, it's time for our strategy to unfold in front of us. It's time for us to get the strategy in place. So here's our mission statement that I think all of you will appreciate and understand. It says, we, African Americans and Jewish Americans, are committed to creating a society, all right, that advances justice by confronting hate, racism, and anti-Semitism. You feel that? It says we, African Americans and Jewish Americans, we're committed to getting the work done. And we want to see these things eliminated along the way. That's our mission for the Justice and Freedom Fellowship Initiative in Chicago. And we're picking up momentum daily on a regular basis. But we didn't end there. We said, what is our strategic overall intent along the way? To rekindle that uniting flame by working together as African Americans and Jewish Americans to bridge the divides that currently exist between us. See? Now, I have to say, to get to these kind of statements, working together takes time. See, there's a number of different exercises you go through with a group of leaders to get to this level. And this is the hope that we have for all of you here as well. So with that, we say now that we're clear on our mission, we're clear on our strategic intent, let's get into the engagement phase. There's 5 core objectives that have been outlined for the Justice and Freedom Fellowship. We want to engage, we want to share, we want to learn, we want to gather, and we want to do what? Do. We want to do. So this leadership team has worked together to create these core objectives. All right, so that's the first: engage, enlist individuals and their networks committed to advancing our mission to affect change. We're not just getting together for the sake of just getting together. We're getting together to do something. And that's what that says here, engage. Secondly, share. Identify and gather existing organizations within a network of individuals that are like-minded in mission to advance policy and mobilize individuals. Okay? So now we want to make sure that we're sharing this vision with others. Then we say it's important we do what? We learn. We have to learn together. Learn about our history. Host training and listening sessions for intergenerational organizing, all right, to fulfill our mission and strategic objectives. And then next, gather, all right? We want to make sure that we're gathering a larger community of religious leaders and others that's going to catch this vision for the Justice and Freedom Fellowship. And all of this is being materialized. And then lastly here, do. Mobilize volunteers to create impactful experiences. Get them involved in the process. We got to get proximate with one another. We can't be distant. We have to get up close and personal with one another, sharing each other's home, sharing each other's space and resources along the way. That's what we do. So these are our core objectives. Now, there's an opportunity for us also, as we're coming together as a new group. The One America movement has an annual summit. This past year it took place in Austin, Texas. So many of those same leaders, they're a part of the Justice and Freedom Fellowship initiative, travel together. Isn't that a beautiful photo? Don't they look good? But that's family, that's community, and those, they're friends together. See, we're moving the needle in the right direction because we're taking this mission very, very seriously together. While at the same time, October 7 occurred. We paused as a leadership team to give due honor and respect and reflect on the crisis in the Middle East. So we came together because we realized that we knew one another, but we still had questions. Because there was misinformation, misrepresentation, and misunderstanding in our country, in our city, about what was happening in the Middle East on October 7th. You had the spiral of misinformation that was flowing. There was conflict and messaging that was being received within the African American community about this crisis. There was confusion about why our Jewish friends in Chicago was not excited about the passing of the policy by the mayor when it came to ceasefire. Because the story was incomplete. So you don't know what you don't know and need to know to eliminate confusion and additional polarized information surfacing within our community. So we as wise leaders, along with Rabbi Fred, we paused. We said, we're not doing another thing until we can agree to disagree in this space about the crisis in the Middle East and have a clear understanding of our messaging collectively together to the clergy and other faith leaders in and around Chicago to represent our Jewish friends. It was just that simple. It was not going to happen on my watch. So we paused and we began to ask this, what concerning challenges and or difficult questions regarding the crisis and war would you like to discuss in this circle? Now, another interesting fact about this conversation that you need to know. Because if you're going to be serious about information and have correct information, you got to have all the players in the room, right? So we reached out to those on the other side and said, would you be open to coming in this space to have a conversation with this group? And the question was no. So there was no bridging moment with the other side. But that didn't hinder this group from moving forward. So we honored that. We respected that. But it helped us as a coalition, as a network, to make sure our messaging was clear, not only representing the organization of the One America movement and the American Jewish Committee, but all the other local churches and synagogues that were represented in our circle. We were united like never before, and it strengthened our movement even further. So we got some energy and some clarity around that. Now the group wanted to begin some additional engagement opportunities. This is something new that happened for the first time in Chicago. Mother Opal, who is the grandmother of Juneteenth, if it wasn't for Mother Opal, who walked 100,000 miles to receive the legislation for Juneteenth, there would not be a Juneteenth in North America. So Mother Opal said, look, I want to take this nationwide. So she reached out to us in Chicago to serve as the primary point for the Walk for Freedom in Chicago. And many of our wonderful, amazing Jewish partners and friends and faith community joined us on the lakefront of Chicago on Juneteenth this past year for the Walk for Freedom, 2.5 miles. You know why it was 2.5? Who knows why it was 2.5? Tell them why it was 2.5, Pastor. Put the pastor on the spot. It took 2.5 years for the slaves in Texas to receive word that they were free. 2.5 years. So we mapped out on the lakefront of Chicago and walked 2.5 miles with many of our amazing Jewish friends in Chicago to mark this moment, the first time in the city of Chicago. Chicago, New York, Dallas, and Los Angeles were the four cities that took part in the Walk of Freedom. Collective trauma, collective history, collective goals for the future. That's what we have to do together. But it don't end there. Engagement phase continue in Chicago with the Justice and Freedom Fellowship. We have what is called the Peace Circle gatherings. This is an opportunity for us again to be in circles together with many of our friends and leaders and talk about the issues that divide us. These are some snapshot photos of that. In this photo in the right, upper right, that is Pastor Blakey from one of our churches there in Chicago that led a serious prayer. As you can see, we have different cultural meals together, opportunity to have small group conversation, to really go deeper in our relationship and conversation together. This is just the beginning of what is happening there as well. A couple of group shots there as well. We started out with a group of 15, now we're growing. We're growing by leaps and bounds within Chicago with this Justice and Freedom Fellowship initiative. I'm going to pause right there and see if you have any questions regarding the Justice and Freedom Fellowship. Yes, sir, in the back.
So you mentioned that you were bridging the divide. You mentioned you were Brian Reuter. Good evening. Thank you for being here with us.
Sure.
You mentioned that you were bridging the divide between the black community and the Jewish community. What was the divide? Can you go into that a little bit and tell us about some detail there?
Yes, a great question. The question is, what is the divide we're trying to close? First and foremost, relationally. You know, there's been a breakdown between our communities collectively together. There's a lot of misunderstandings. There's a lack of advocacy work that hasn't taken place by both sides historically. All right? We want to make sure that we're on the same page when it comes to the issues of equality and justice within our neighborhood, how we are addressing racism and hate and crime in our cities as well. So we want to make sure that we're on the same page regarding all of those issues, because there are many believe that both sides are not doing enough. That both sides are not doing enough. What can we accomplish more together than we can apart? So those are things that we're trying to close those gaps on a social level, on an economic level, on a spiritual level, all of those issues to address the spiritual crisis that we're trying to attack through the One America movement at the same time. Yes. And politically. Yes, sir.
Good evening. Thank you for that wonderful talk.
Sure.
So with the polarizer in chief about to start in the White House, how do you feel that the current environment for the next 4 years is going to affect any likelihood of improving relations among different groups?
It's a great question. And it's a question that I believe, first and foremost, we as faith people need to be praying about right now. There's some prejudging that has occurred, while at the same time, that is the office of the President of the United States of America. And so with that understanding, we always have to respect the office. You respect the office. And you do whatever you can on a local level to ensure that the struggle and the issues that you're trying to confront are not pushed to the curve. You don't allow that to happen. You continue to advocate for what is right, for what is just, and for what is righteous. This is not the time to put to the curve our spiritual practices. This is not the time for us to get further and further apart from each other. Again, that's one leader. It's one leader. But at the same time, each person in this room is responsible for what happens on a local level. There's politics, and then there's policies. There's many policies that can be pushed through that can really inform and change the course of local situations that doesn't come from Washington, D.C. So we can't get fooled by or bamboozled by an office and lose our local strength and power on a regular basis, because your voice, your leadership, and your organizing matters. So we have to stay vigilant. We have to keep our heads on the swivel, but we got to build a more uniting community around faith and around the issues that matter to God, that should matter to each and every one of us at the same time. That's my short and quick response to that question. Thank you.
I got a question. I'm gonna take precedent. Hold on one moment. Thank you. It's incredible to hear the work that you're doing. So thank you so much for sharing.
Sure.
I'm curious, how are you seeing it translate from the leaders to the folk and to the communities? I think one of the challenges I see in the history, you talk like 40s, 50s, 60s to now, is that it seems like sometimes at the top levels, there's nice coordination between this Jewish organization and this African American organization. This rabbi knows this pastor, but communities don't always come together in relationship. As you work with your fellows, what impact are you seeing beyond the circle that you're creating with the larger communities that they're a part of?
That's a great question. I will put it to you in a percentage. I would say about 75% of those that are involved in the Justice and Freedom Fellowship right now are on a lay level. There are members of synagogues, they're members of local churches, etc. And only about 25% would represent rabbis, senior pastors, etc. And that's important. That's very important because speed of the leader, speed of the team. But oftentimes what happens is if there's too many, senior leaders in the room, so to speak, then those that are sitting in the pews and others, they're hesitant to get involved. They're hesitant to speak their piece at the same time. Now, let me share one very quick deal. One of our last Peace Circle gathering, we had an invitation that was extended to our local Israel consulate that's in Chicago. Well, the local leadership team, we had a meeting before the larger gathering took place, and there was some concern about having the Israel consulate in that space because they felt that many of those that were representing the Jewish community that were part of the Justice and Freedom Fellowship were concerned that they would be censored in that space. And so we made the decision at that point, literally, to uninvite the Israel consulate because of that mere point. We did not want anyone to feel censored because of leadership in that space. Now, one other point that we have to be clear about here, Umbrella Grace, about this, we have to make sure that there's equal representation in the room at the same time. So we can't ask senior pastors from the African American community to show up in this space to be a part of the Justice and Freedom Fellowship when we don't have the Rabbi Jasons in the room. That's sending the wrong signal to the senior pastors representing the African American church. Now, once we're in the space together, what we have learned and understand, there's a different model of organizing within the Jewish community versus how organizing happens within the African American, Baptist, Methodist churches, etc. That's the learning that has to take place within the core objectives. So now we have a better understanding of that learning. It's not being shunned that, wow, the rabbis are not here. That doesn't mean that that synagogue in Chicago is not interested, but there's a different paradigm of operation in how we mobilize and organize. Now we can continue on with the movement and not have any misunderstandings along the way. But the balance of leadership and also intergenerational is extremely important. When you think about the civil rights movement, who were out there? You had young people that were out there marching, walking for freedom. This movement has to be intergenerational at the same time as well if we want to see the results that we're hoping for. Yes, sir. I think over here, then we
Michael was very patient, so Michael's question. How does the inclusion of those with disabilities or different abilities play into your work and your mission?
We are a mutually inclusive movement. There's no room to discriminate. Every life, every voice, every person matters. Matters to God and should matter to us. No discrimination. And so, matter of fact, there's one person that's a part of our movement, and I recently just discovered this, that's been coming to our sessions that has a hearing deficiency. And when I heard that, my heart just dropped. It's like, well, we have to do a better job of how we communicate to that particular member of our family. We have to raise the bar in terms of our sensitivity. So there's no discriminating in terms of those that are involved in the Justice and Freedom Fellowship initiative. None whatsoever.
Say your name first.
Yeah, my name is Robert Ziff. I was part of a movement that you were just talking about, marching for civil rights in the early 60s. There couldn't have been closer participation. There is the exact opposite on college campuses today. There is no active, integrated participation with the youth. You say you've got to bring the youth in. How do we do that today? How do we communicate to them what occurred in the past can certainly pave a way towards something in the future?
That's an excellent point, and I'm so thankful that you asked the question, because the next generation is asking one key question, friends, and that question is there room for us at the table? Is there room for us at the table? Will we be empowered to lead? Will we have a say? And can we be a part of the strategizing moving forward? See, the one thing I would say, friends, about those that are on our higher education institution campuses today, they don't feel included. And that's one of the reasons why they begin to scatter and don't get involved, because no one is being intentional about inviting them in. And we have to do a better job as adults in making sure that they are welcomed. We have to have outreach strategies for them. We have to have different roles assigned for them. That's the only way you build a movement. When you look at the civil rights movement, the NAACP, Urban League, all of these different movements historically were driven by young people. And so we have to make sure that we create that same environment for the things that we're trying to do currently here today. That's the only way it's going to be sustainable. See? And at the same time, and this is part of my messaging, we have to love everyone into the conversation. We can't judge anybody into the conversation. We can't blame anybody into the conversation. We can't guilt anybody into the conversation. We can't shame anybody into the conversation. We have to love each other into the conversation. That's how, but we also have to tell the truth. We also have to tell the truth. And that's the pain of our past. I give a series, I do a talk on inherited privileges. Now, some of my colleagues would take that and talk about inherited racism. But it's inherited privileges. There are those that are part of our American society that have benefited from those that were enslaved in our country throughout generations. But that doesn't mean that you're going to blame someone that didn't own slaves or didn't have plantations and all of those things. But those are the rights that people have been fighting for years. But to ignore the mere fact that there's no inherited privilege because of that, then you're not telling the truth. See, these are the kind of very tender and tough conversations that we have to have if we want to continue to advance the democracy and human rights within our society. We have to tell the truth about that. And inherited privileges is one of those. Now, that keeps the conversation fluid because you're not placing blame. All you're asking is to ask yourself the question, do you believe you have inherited privileges? Have you studied your family tree? Are you being truthful with yourself about that? That's how we build strong relationships together. One of the coolest things that happened, and I want to pay attention to time, Rabbi Jason. One of the coolest things happened when I served at Willow Creek Community Church that I didn't see coming. When I had this church of over 25,000 conservative Republicans. I'm the brother from the hood. I'm from the ghetto of Chicago. It don't get more ghetto than where I came from. When I had these white conservative Republicans come up to Reverend Bibbs and say, how should I vote? That's what I did. Inside, I didn't do it out. How should I vote? They were asking me. Well, first and foremost, why do you think they were asking me that question? Because they felt comfortable with me. See, in their mind, I didn't fit the stereotype of other African Americans. I can be trusted because I give them the Alvin smile. I'm a pastor of the church. I left the hood. I did all these things. Now I'm going to ask Reverend Bibbs how to vote. Well, I was shocked by that, but I didn't give them what they were looking for. I gave them a different answer to their question. I'll give you the very quick version. I said, first thing, I'm honored that you asked me the question. I'm just really flattered by that. I said, secondly, I want to remind you that when you go into that polling place, that's a private moment between you and your God. It's a private moment, and don't ever forget that. Don't ever give that up. I said, secondly, I want to give you a couple of quick tips here. The first thing I want you to do, it's going to take you a little bit of time to do this, but I guarantee you it's worth it. I said, the first thing I want you to do, I want you to think about all the different candidates you're thinking about voting for. I want you to do a little homework. Find out about their belief system. What do they believe? What are the things that really keep the blood flowing through their veins? What do they believe? I said, secondly, I want you to check their moral conscience and temperature, because we all know morals are important. The next thing I'm asking them is, I want you to check their spiritual condition. All right, what's their spiritual condition? What's their faith background, etc.? And then last, I want to ask them about their values. What do they value? Because values do what? Values help to shape our behavior. All right, are you tracking with me? So beliefs and morals and spiritual condition and their values. Then I said, now you got some information that's going to help you decide who you vote for. You're going to have some information there. I said, now you're going to go in that polling booth. You're going to make your vote known. I said, now when you come out, you have two choices. You can keep that private, or you can make it public. Be prepared if you go public. Be prepared. And I said, after you do all of these amazing things, I want you to know that Reverend Bibbs will be praying for you. I will be praying for you. God bless you. I will be praying for you. And they would smile just like she did and said, thank you. But they didn't hear anything about me saying, vote right, vote left, vote for this. None of that. Because it's a private moment between you and God. And the respect that those in that congregation had for me, because the word got around campus about this template that Reverend Bibbs shared, the respect went through the roof even higher. But I didn't get called into the elder's office and said, Reverend Bibbs, you're telling people how to vote. That didn't happen. So friends, there's different ways that we go about addressing these issues, but we have to do it together. That's the only way we're going to survive. That's the only way we change the overall trajectory within our society here today. I just want to again say thank you all for your time here tonight. I know we went a little bit over, but I think it was worth it. And Fred, you come on up.
Well, I think you can all understand exactly why it was that I wanted to bring Reverend Bibbs to come and speak with you guys. Whew. I mean, I knew you're spectacular, A-Train, but man. If you want to learn more about the work of the One America Movement, the place that you can go is oneamericamovement.org, all one word. It's the worst email address you're ever going to have, because if you want to contact either of us, I'm Fred at oneamericamovement.org. He's Alvin at oneamericamovement.org. And we would be happy to answer any questions that you have, talk to you, and point you towards how you can get more involved in the future. Shabbat Shalom to all of you, and thank you so very, very much for your attention.